Stephanie and I some
Okay,
questions.
thanks, Katie. I've got Slack open. Yeah. How are we looking on numbers, Natalie?
We just jumped up another bit. We're at 193.
I think just give people a couple of more minutes.
Yeah, maybe.
Once it starts to level out,
Yeah, approaching 200 now, so still jumping on.
if someone hasn't had the Zoom open, it can take a couple of minutes to fire it up.
Oh, right. I feel like for the last one too, we gave everyone, I think, was it 5 minutes we
I think it
waited?
was 5 minutes we gave everyone, yeah.
Kind of the rule of thumb.
And Natalie, when you press enter, it takes a few seconds for everyone to be able to join. So I'll just pause and yeah, fill
Okay,
out the welcome for a little bit
sounds good.
while people join. It just takes a while for people to connect. How are we up to? How are we looking?
We are at 214 as our total participants.
I think we should, I think it's 5 minutes past now.
Good.
It's
Okay,
stable, it's
Yeah,
stabilized as well. Like it's been
yeah.
around that amount for
So
cool.
if you let me know, Natalie, I won't be able to see when people are in because all I can see is the panel view across the top. So just let me know when
Right.
you're going to press it, and
Okay,
then
sounds good. All right, I'll go ahead and jump out now, mute myself, and then start the webinar.
okay. Okay, welcome everyone to this very special event. And we're really delighted to be able to welcome you all to this online book launch. And I'm really delighted as well to have the editors and to have one of the authors along with us as well. And just before we really start and get into to tonight's session or this morning's session, depending on where you are, I just want to extend my thanks to the team at the Centre for Whale Research who've done all the background work in order to make this event happen, the behind the scenes work, and indeed they're behind the scenes now. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining. We're really excited to be able to share this event with you all. Before we move on to the program, I just want to give an opportunity to introduce the panel and the presenters here this evening, this morning, who you're going to be hearing from. So I'm Darren Croft. I'm Executive Director at the Centre for Whale Research, and I have an academic position here at the University of Exeter. That's one of the things we are spread globally this morning, around the world. I'm going to hand over to Stephanie to introduce herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Stephanie King. I'm a Professor of Animal Behaviour at the University of Bristol in the UK, and I'm also Co-Director of Shark Bay Dolphin Research.
Andy.
Hi, I'm Andy Foote, and I'm a researcher at the University of Oslo in Norway.
Alan.
Hi, I'm Dr. Ellen Garland. I'm a reader in the Sea Mammal Research Unit at the University of St Andrews, and I'm chair of the South Pacific Whale Research Consortium.
Michael, over to you.
Hi, I'm Michael Weiss. I'm the research director at the Center for Whale Research in Friday Harbor, Washington.
Wonderful. Thank you, everyone. We look forward to hearing your contributions as we move through the talk. So I'm going to move through the slides now, and we're just going to look at what we're going to cover in this session. So obviously, I'm Darren. I'm introducing and giving a welcome. I'm just going to give a bit of background and context to the book, how the book developed, and why our motivation for producing the book. Andy is then going to go on and talk about a section of the book around evolution. Stephanie will then chat with you guys and present slides on cooperation in cetacean societies. Ellen will talk about culture in cetacean societies. And Michael will give us a behind the scenes glimpse at the cover image, which are the southern resident killer whales and video that Michael shot using a drone. Finally, we're going to have a section on question and answers. And you're able to post questions during the talk or during the talks in the question section on Zoom, or the question button on Zoom. Those questions can be posted anonymously. They won't be seen by other people. We will answer the questions at the end, but we do encourage you to ask the questions as we're going along, as they're fresh in your mind, but we'll hold them till the end before we answer them. Before I go any further, I just want to thank the many people who are involved in making this book happen. We are here as editors, but it's the names on this screen who did the really hard work of writing the chapters. The book consists of 5 parts. We're only going to touch on 3 parts of the book this evening because we would need many online sessions to cover all the material in the book, obviously. But we've selected sections that give you a diverse flavour of the book. But I just want to highlight 2 areas that we're not covering in this session, thinking about the socio-ecology of cetacean societies. Michael will touch on some of this in his presentation, but the section we're really not covering are human cetacean interactions and thinking about diversity within the scientists studying cetaceans. So I just flagged those, and you can delve into those in the book itself. So why read or study cetacean societies? Why are we so interested? Well, they're inherently difficult to study. And that's one of the exciting things that have developed over the last couple of decades, and methods, and I'll touch on those in a second. As you'll see in these talks, they have incredibly complex social lives. Indeed, they have unique social systems that only occur in cetaceans, such as sons and daughters staying with their mums for their entire life. That has only evolved in marine mammals, in toothed whales. They represent a peak in cognitive evolution, similar to primates, similar to elephants. Socially complex, and indeed that interaction between social complexity and cognitive development is likely linked. They have unusual life histories. We'll hear in Michael's talk later on a hint at some of that. They form complex cooperation. Stephanie will touch on that, and cultural traditions, and Ellen will touch on that in her talk. I think one of the key things is many of these populations, including the southern residents that you can see on the book cover, are at risk of extinction. It's important that we understand these societies to be able to protect them. The book had its origins back in 2001. I just want to 2021, sorry, 2001 being a very, very, very long time, 2021. We received an email from Andy, a message, would a 21st century dolphin societies book reflecting the state of the island be worthwhile, enjoyable? And that was kind of the embryonic start of this book. And it wasn't until 2023 that we were actually reading first drafts. And 2026, we're really excited to be here and share the book with you. So just to give you an idea of that kind of publication process and how long it takes. And I think at the time, none of us were really sure whether or not this was, did the world want another book on whales and dolphins? I think the answer is yes. And it's great to see all you guys here this evening, but just to give you an idea of the time it's taken to get there. The title Cetacean Societies builds off of a very well-established book that was published at the turn of the century, 26 years ago. And we went for the evolution of cetacean societies because we were able to ask questions that we weren't able to ask 20 years ago. And so the book very much follows in the field of primate societies, which had a sequel of the evolution of primate societies. What do we want to achieve? We really want to update the scientific advances that had happened since the first publication, produce a text that was inclusive, that reflected the diversity within marine mammal science. So we very much push for mixture of junior and senior authors on chapters, and representation of gender within the collection of editors as well. Reflect on where we come from over the last 20 years since this very influential text was published, Cetacean Societies. But because the field had progressed, we're able to take a comparative approach as well and reflect a little bit on some of the similarities and differences between cetacean societies and primate societies. Over that time period, since the first book was published 20 years, there's been some really big leaps forward in methodology. The human genome was first recorded 2003, costing 3 billion, taking hundreds of labs. In 2016, Andy was publishing papers with tens of killer whales all sequenced in a lab with whole genome sequencing. 1999, the first digital camera really came out to be used within cetacean biology. 2016, we have drones. Now we have AI scoring drone videos. Michael will say a little bit about that. 1999, the first D-tag, the electronic tag that records acoustic, was deployed on a whale. And now these tags have been miniaturized and record a whole load of different traits on animals, such as heart rate, physiological traits as well. Sadly, over that time period in 20 years, we've lost a species, just reflecting how threatened some of these populations are. The river dolphin's gone extinct. Long-term studies have matured. So the southern resident killer whales, for example, started in 1976. About halfway through the study to where we are today, the original book was published. So that long-term data set has kind of doubled in size, which has increased the breadth of questions that we're able to ask. Okay, Andy, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thanks, Darren. That was a really nice introduction. And each of us chose a key word that we thought we could use to essentially cover the chapters that we were going to give some short presentations on. And we've, I think it's gone back to screensaver, Darren.
Okay. So, okay, sorry. Yeah.
No worries. And yeah, the word I chose was evolution, and that has two different meanings. And one of them is this gradual development of something, which I think Darren has framed really nicely with the development of this book. This was really a gradual evolutionary process, but it's also the process by which animals and plants and other organisms are transformed into different forms over successive generations. And of course, in whales and dolphins, that can be through culture or genetics. And I'm going to focus on the chapters. Oh, sorry, next slide, please, Darren. And I'm going to concentrate on the parts that involve the genetics. Now, as Darren mentioned, in 2004, we saw the publication of the human genome. So this was one of many different advancements that we saw since the publication of Cetacean Societies. You can see this figure from the actual book itself that shows some of these others. And if we go on to the next slide, why was this such a big thing, undertaking? Well, actually, if we go to the next slide, sorry, Darren, it's something that took 13 years to complete and cost $3 billion. So it was a huge undertaking, really just sequencing a tiny little bit of the genome at a time and then putting that together. And we actually describe in the genomics chapter a little bit about the process and the technologies that have changed and allow us now, if we go to the next slide, to basically sequence 1,000 killer whale genomes in really less than 1 week, from going from having a sample of tissue from the animal to actually having a fully sequenced genome. And the cost is roughly $1,000 at the moment, including all of the different sort of lab reagents and etc. And if we go on to the next slide. So the 3 different chapters that come under the evolutionary history and genetic composition of cetacean societies, we've got the evolutionary history of cetacean behavior and cognition, genomic insights into demographic and evolutionary histories, and the role of kinship in shaping cetacean societies. So I'll give you a very quick snapshot of what each of those chapters contains. If we go to the next slide, we see this long evolutionary process, something that we can't actually really tackle with just genetics alone. So this was undertaken by Michael McGowan from the Smithsonian Institute and colleagues Morgan McCarthy and Matthew McCurry. And we see this change from a very primitive archaeoseat there on the left to these complex bottlenose dolphins that we see today with complex social structure, acoustic behavior, etc. And really, what was a key evolutionary trait that changed during that time was the change in brain size. And this is something that Michael McGowan and colleagues look at, comparing this to the phylogenetic history of these different organisms, these different whale taxa, and to understand when these rapid changes in brain size and probably evolutionary behavior as well took place. If we go on to the next slide, then we start to look at the genomics. So what do these genomes actually tell us? And of course, the genomes of even just one individual contain ancestry from 2 individuals from the previous generation, 4 from the previous generation, then 8, and so on. And very quickly, you just have to go 10 generations back, and already you have ancestry from over 1,000 individuals. And we can actually use that information to try and track how big populations were in the past, and really recapture the founding events where populations like the southern resident killer whales colonized an area and then expanded outwards. Now, if we go on to the next slide, we can even go back further than that by using ancient DNA. So here we see Marie-Louise. So Dr. Marie-Louise, she's been working with bottlenose dolphins for her PhD and her postdoc work, and now she's a researcher in Greenland working with narwhal and belugas. And here we can see her extracting DNA in these clean lab facilities from a 4,500-year-old bottlenose dolphin jaw that was found off the North Sea. And this gave her some information about exactly when the coastal ecotype and the pelagic ecotype of bottlenose dolphin diverged from one another. We go to the next slide. Now, one of the things that Ellen is going to present shortly is how cultural evolution takes place. But of course, sometimes genetics and culture can interact with one another. So culture can allow these animals to find new environments, and then the genetics can adapt the genome to help adapt to these environments. And here we see bottlenose dolphins again in Shark Bay this time. And we can see that actually the matrilineal lineage shows a comparison to the passing on of this sponging behavior. If we go to the next slide. Now, sometimes we actually see adaptive changes that are linked to culture. One of those is in the genes that are associated in the methionine cycle. Now, those of you that are vegetarian, perhaps you have to take vitamin B12 supplements, and it's a little bit due to having sort of less dietary protein, and actually that can influence a little bit this cycle, which is important for B12, vitamin B12 production. And actually that's where we see in the marine mammal-eating killer whales strong selection on those genes that are in that methionine cycle. And here on the left, we can see trees that represent the evolutionary history broadly across the whole genome in black. And then in red, we see the trees for those genes. And we can see these really long branches where there's been a lot of genetic change very rapidly. And of course, that seems to be genetic change that's associated with cultural variation, like the diet of these marine mammal eating killer whales. And if we go to the next slide, we also look at kinship. And this was really interesting to be involved in. It was quite new for me to think about. And I think it's a useful way to sort of have a feel for, if you're a student, what you're going to learn from the book. Now, one of the things that Darren looks at is the menopause. And I think Darren's going to talk about this later. And one of the things that changes, one of the evolutionary forces there is how related a female is to the rest of her family group. And this can actually change from when she's born to when she becomes the matriarch. And actually plotting this out in terms of how related these different individuals are really helped me understand this. So this is a chapter where we really look at these forces of how related individuals are, the advantage they get from helping their kin, and how that then shapes genetic variation within these populations. And next slide, I think this is the final one. So yeah, genomes allow us to retrace genetic evolution through time and to better understand the formation of complex cetacean societies. And when they're combined with data on evolution of cultural or life history traits, well, then we can learn how the genetic variation can evolve synergistically with these other variables underlying cetacean societies. And I think that's the last slide from me.
Thanks, Andy. So another section of our book was on reproduction, cooperation, and conflict in cetacean societies. And next slide, Darren. And in this section, we present 3 chapters. We have one on sociality, life history, and the evolution of menopause in toothed whales. We have another on alliance formation in toothed whales, drawing on the bottlenose dolphins of Shark Bay as a case study. And the 3rd chapter is on the communicative and cognitive skills underlying cooperation in cetaceans. And I'd like to briefly dive into this 3rd chapter in a little more detail. So cetaceans are well known for cooperating extensively in the wild. This includes feeding strategies that appear to require coordinated action and the formation of long-term cooperative alliances for reproductive purposes. However, animals can behave in ways that function cooperatively without actively and intentionally cooperating. And it is only in recent years that we've begun to critically reflect on the mechanisms underlying such apparent acts of cooperation. So to understand if cetaceans are actively cooperating together, we want to test if they can understand their partner's role in a cooperative task. Such tests are impossible to do in the wild, but we can work at ethical facilities where small cetacean species are kept in natural seawater lagoons and can choose to participate in cognitive experiments. In this experiment, we taught pairs of dolphins to each press their own underwater button, and they had to do this within 1 second of each other in order to cooperate successfully in the task. We then introduced delays where dolphins weren't given access to the buttons at the same time. Now, if they understood their partner's role in the task, they should wait for their partner before attempting to cooperate, before attempting to push the button. And that's exactly what we see in this video. Next slide, Darren. Such an experimental setup has allowed us to show that dolphins can work together with extreme precision, even when they have to wait for their partner, and that dolphins can learn to understand their partner's role in a cooperative situation. So some cetacean species appear to understand that they need to cooperate with their partner, but can they actively communicate to achieve this? Do they use vocal signals to mediate cooperation? Next slide, please. So to address this, back one, Darren. Thank you. To address this, we used state-of-the-art acoustic tags attached with suction cups to the dolphins that recorded all the vocalizations that the dolphins made. So you can see that in the image. We also moved the buttons to the opposite side of the lagoon from each other to make this task more difficult for the dolphins. Next slide. And our results showed that dolphins used vocal signals to facilitate cooperative success, and that they engaged in more precise behavioral synchrony when using whistles. So they used whistles to coordinate behavior in order to achieve success in the cooperative task. Next slide, please. Thanks. So we now know that cetacean species can actively coordinate their behavior to achieve cooperative success. And so moving from ethical facilities to working with animals in the wild, we wanted to know how cetacean species may keep track of cooperative partners over the longer term. And drawing from over 40 years of research on wild dolphins in Shark Bay in Western Australia, we know that male dolphins form lifelong alliances where they cooperate over decades to help each other gain access to females. We also know that each dolphin has its own distinctive identity signal called a signature whistle that is similar in function to a human name, thus allowing individuals to keep track of each other over time. And in recent years, we have been able to use technology such as drones to record dolphin behavioral responses when conducting sound playback experiments. So we conducted sound playback experiments to male dolphins in Shark Bay, playing back the signature whistles of different cooperative allies, allowing us to measure fine-scale responses to whistle playbacks in the wild. Next slide, please. And these experiments allowed us to show that male dolphins use signature whistles to discriminate between allies based on cooperative investment in the alliance or team. So they responded more strongly to allies that previously provided cooperative support. thus revealing that male dolphins form a concept of team membership by linking signature whistles with history of cooperative interactions. So to summarize, this chapter in the book highlights that the synergism between experimental work in ethical facilities and field-based studies with wild animals has revealed that some cetacean species possess the cognitive skills to actively coordinate cooperative tasks. It also nicely demonstrates how studying cetacean social cognition in the wild is a burgeoning area of research, thanks to the significant technological advancements that have been made since the publication of the first Cetacean Societies book. I'll hand over to Ellen next.
Thanks, Stephanie. So we're now going to talk about culture. So you might be asking, what is social learning in animal culture? So Darren, next slide. Thank you. So what do we mean by this social learning in animal culture? So we're going to be talking about non-genetic inheritance, learning from others, cultural transmission, and evolution. Now, culture can be defined really differently by different people, but so we're actually all on the same page. I define culture in a very, very broad sense as the social learning of shared information or behaviors from conspecifics. So we're learning something from someone else. Now, I view culture on a big continuum from complex human traditions down to very simple ones, and this allows us to take that comparative approach. But humans are really an outlier on one end of this continuum. So, but what about our cetacean cultures? Well, in the book, we cover 3 aspects of cetacean culture. So the first is the cultural transmission of foraging behaviors in cetaceans. So this includes examples of how whales or dolphins learn from each other how to catch their prey. For example, how a particular feeding technique used by humpback whales in the Gulf of Maine, called lobtail feeding, how that's spread through the population. It also covers a lot of the methodological advancements on how we actually decide whether a particular behavior is actually likely to be cultural. The second covers the vocal cultures of cetaceans. So this includes detailed examples of how sperm whales, killer whales, and humpback whales learn their vocalizations from each other. And finally, we cover culture and conservation in cetaceans. Now, this chapter explores how culture can create resilience to environmental changes, but also when cultures make animals more vulnerable to this. By integrating culture into conservation practice, well, this is really challenging. So it also provides some helpful suggestions on how this might be done. So that's a little bit of a flavor of what's in the culture section, but you might be left thinking, well, how do we actually investigate culture? So let's explore one example of cetacean culture, which is actually going to be my work on humpback whale song culture in the South Pacific. Next slide. Perfect, thanks. So my research investigates the function, learning, and cultural transmission of humpback whale song. For humpbacks, it's only the males that sing, and they sing a long, complex, repetitive, and really stereotyped display. Now, all individuals can make sounds, we call social sounds, but it's only the males that combine these to make these big, long stereotype songs. Next slide. So song functions in sexual selection through mate attraction or to mediate male-male social interactions, but it also could be both, where it might act as a multi-message signal. Now, within a population, all males are singing the same song. So we have extremely strong cultural conformity within a population. But the song is also constantly changing, constantly evolving from breeding season to breeding season. And all males make these changes to maintain this observed conformity. So this would appear a bit of a paradox, to have a display that is both the same and changing. So next slide. So data indicates that at any point in time within a population, all males are singing the same version of this highly stereotyped display. As changes occur to the structure of the song, males rapidly incorporate these changes into their own display. Then as a whole, the song of the population moves forward in small to large steps, in evolutionary to revolutionary steps. Now, at this upper extreme, we have song revolutions replacing the entire song. This occurs when a song is introduced from a neighboring population. Next slide. So in the South Pacific, where I work, there are 6 main breeding populations spread from the east coast of Australia across to French Polynesia. After feeding in Antarctic waters, South Pacific humpbacks migrate north to their discrete breeding locations. Now, each population is genetically distinct, and photo identification studies show a high level of maternally driven site fidelity to these locations and occasional interchange among the island groups. Of course, they also sing a song. Next slide. So I've described South Pacific song over an 11-year period. So populations are arranged from west to east across the top, and there's also a map there. Now, each color I'm going to show you represents a different song type, with similar colors representing the evolution of a song type. So from blue through to light blue is going to be one song lineage. Now, if we look at East Australia, you can see multiple colors representing multiple different song types. Now, if we look out across the South Pacific, you can see song spreads east from East Australia to French Polynesia with a 1 to 2 year delay. But let's focus on the blue song type now. You can see it's spreading in a stepwise fashion across this region. This was then replaced by the dark red song type, which also periodically is spread across the region. That new dark red song replaced the current blue song in each population along the way. So we have a really dynamic picture of song evolution, revolution, and cultural transmission across this big ocean basin area. Next slide. Thank you. So we have multiple song revolutions spreading across the South Pacific in a series of cultural waves over a decade. This is like changing your national anthem every 2 to 3 years to something that your neighbor's been singing, and this makes no sense whatsoever. So this is really different to what we see in the North Pacific, though, as we don't observe these revolutionary song changes or these big waves of completely new songs spreading across the region, at least so far. But what we do know about song is that it's important. It has rhythm, repetition, structure, and it's influenced by sexual selection and cultural evolution. So that's me, and I will now hand over to Michael.
Hi. So yeah, as Darren said, I'm gonna give a little bit of context for the cover image. So I'll tell you about how we get that image, but also about the project that kind of surrounds these aerial observations. And a lot of it is about studying kind of the social complexity of southern residents and big killer whales, but largely southern residents from the air. Next slide, please. So at the Center for Whale Research, we are obviously very interested in doing some fundamental science on killer whales. We're also interested in conserving the southern residents. And we know one of the big things that drives births and deaths in the southern resident population is their interactions with their primary prey, which is Chinook salmon. So on the top, you see births in yellow and deaths in blue, and on the bottom, you see a measure of local salmon abundance. So we're interested in those interactions between the whales and their prey. Next slide, Darren. But we're also interested in their social lives, and not just because their social lives are really interesting, but because they have important impacts on their survival and reproduction. So for example, southern residents have this unique social structure where both, resident killer whales generally have a unique social structure where both males and females will stay with their mother for their entire lives, and this leads to some important impacts on their survival. So males who lose their mother during their life have a higher chance of dying after their mother's gone. We also see other effects of social network structure on male survival. And those social features interact with the environment. So we see evidence that when salmon abundance is higher, we see greater cohesion of social networks. We see the whales kind of adapting their social structure to their environment. So these two features, the social environment, the kind of the biological environment, the ecological environment, their prey abundance, really do have a lot of interactions, and both have important implications for survival and reproduction in this population. Next slide. I also am just generally interested in social complexity. My contribution, in addition to the cover to this book, was a chapter on studying social complexity across cetaceans. And we can learn a lot by studying, these whales with these more traditional methods of photo identification. But as Stephanie was pointing out, we can get a lot more information by taking this aerial perspective, and that can help us both understand their social lives and also how they interact with their prey. Next slide, please. So this is the video. I hope it's playing okay on your end. It's a little jumpy on mine, but this is the video that cover image comes from. And what this is JPOD in 2024 coming around Turn Point, which is the most northwestern point in the continental United States. It's not the most north and it's not the most west, but it is the most northwest. And this is a big chunk of JPOD, not quite everybody, but you got the J37s and a couple of the J17s and the J22s, J45. And what this kind of aerial perspective gives us, in addition to these beautiful images, is it lets us see spacing of these group members, who's interacting with whom in different ways. We can actually count tail beats to look at effort that they're putting into swimming along with their respiration rate. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Darren. We can also look at their hunting success and their hunting tactics. So this is J57 and J56, a couple young whales chasing a salmon together. They never did catch this fish, but we've gotten quite a few observations of whales hunting, and we've been able to start, and we're hoping to publish some of this year, start looking at the factors that predict success in these hunts, especially social factors. So there's some evidence that whales are more successful in these hunts when they are hunting in groups, and that the composition of those groups matters. So two young whales like this don't do very well at catching a fish, but an older whale with a younger whale might be able to. Next slide, please. You can also look at some evidence of teaching and cultural practices. So this is J51 doing a little bit of what looks like salmon hat. Some of you might have heard about this, of whales wearing salmon on their head. In this case, we were able to see that in addition to pushing this dead salmon around, he was actually seemed to be presenting this fish to his young, less than a year old sister, J62 there, who is certainly not on solid food yet, but is still getting a chance to mess around with the dead fish potentially. It's a one-off observation. We're still trying to figure out exactly what's going on here, but there's the potential for some teaching happening as well. Next slide, Darren. We were also able to observe things that we weren't expecting to see, including this new behavior we've been observing since 2024, which we are calling allokelping, which is the use of these small pieces of bull kelp stipe. We think as a social grooming tool. They'll break off these pieces of stipe and wedge them between each other and then roll them back and forth. This happens between highly related individuals, individuals who are close in age. And it also seems to have some correlation with the presence of dead, flaky skin. So it might be treating discomfort or potentially rubbing dead skin off. Next slide, please. I think this is the same video, actually. We could go to the next slide. Yeah, so we're able, with this drone footage, to not only find this new behavior, but in some pretty good detail document how it's structured in JPOD, what it correlates with, what its potential function might be. So these new aerial perspectives, in addition to giving us these really beautiful images, are letting us understand things about these populations that we just would never have even known about in some cases, and certainly wouldn't have been able to document in detail without this new technology. And then my last slide, if we go to that, is I'll just leave you with this. This is a new observation from this last year, again, with this allokelping. I don't know if you'll be able to see it with the compression we have, but that's J62 again, the same little calf who was learning to mess with a fish potentially in that previous video, seems to be trying to learn how to allokelp. She's got a little piece of kelp in her mouth. She's rubbing it on her mom's side. She hasn't quite figured out how to let go of it to actually do the behavior that you were seeing in the previous video. So we're really excited about the kind of possibilities and the new areas of research that this technology has opened up for us. and obviously always very excited to be able to share the images we get with everybody and hopefully use them to inspire folks to learn more about these animals.
Wonderful. Thank you everyone for sharing those talks with the audience, and hopefully that gives you a little bit of an insight into what we think, we're obviously biased, what an exciting book this is, and just how far the field has progressed in the last sort of 2.5 decades. The technological revolution, the onset of digital cameras, of drones, of acoustic recording equipment, of molecular tools, genetic tools, has really transformed the type of questions we're able to ask in cetacean societies. And that's been really the core topic and content rather behind the book. As you'll have seen, the publishers, Chicago University Press, have been very generous in giving a discount. There's a link there to the discount. There's also a link there to the Centre for Whale Research if you want to learn more about the southern resident killer whales and the work behind the cover. So I'm actually just going to stop sharing my screen now because questions have been pinging in continuously as our panel members have been talking, and I've been noticing some really wonderful questions. So thank you everyone for your questions. If you just give me a moment, I just need to open up the questions. I won't be 1 second. One of the questions that's come in actually is, will this be available after the talk? Will you be able to watch this again? The answer is yes. This is being recorded, and we will post and share the recording online. We'll just start with a general question, really, and Michael, I'm going to direct this one to you. And it's, how did you get into cetacean biology, and what age were you when you started?
Great question. So I have been interested in whales and killer whales specifically for I think my whole life, more or less. I started getting into the actual field though when I think my first actual kind of experience with it was when I was about 18 years old, and I was a intern at the Whale Museum on San Juan Island. And then from there, I just kind of kept finding other internships and eventually jobs and eventually a PhD program. Yeah, I've been very much trying to get into the field for as long as I've been trying to get into any field, I think.
Good. Okay, and then we'll kind of go back through the series of talks, Andy. So I'm going to direct one to you here. What causes rapid changes in brain size? You mentioned the kind of brain size evolution over evolutionary time. What do we think has driven that change in brain size in cetaceans?
Yeah, I think so. I should say this is from a chapter where I wasn't involved, but I think really we could suggest almost the any change really would be to do with having a small incremental advantage by making that change. And that's really how evolution works. So essentially, if you have a difference, maybe it's in body size, brain size, whatever it is, you go on to have more offspring, they are more successful and so on. And that tends to be the way that evolution works, is just by these sort of very marginal gains, but gradually those can accumulate. And we can imagine that there was this advantage in sociality, in having sort of complex communication and so on. We can see just how advantageous it is from these incredible images and film footage that Michael and Stephanie shared when these dolphins and killer whales work together. So I think, yeah, a gradual process, a selection pressure driving it, and basically leading to a small advantage that then gets carried on generation after generation if they carry the genetic variation that underpins that change in brain size.
Good. Okay, Andy, we'll stick with you, and then we'll just go through because the questions are in that order. So, the question again on the topic that you covered: is it possible to assess the amount of inbreeding that's occurred over time? And I'm guessing that's using those molecular techniques that you were talking about. Is it built or something new? So that's the question. But I guess the core is it possible to assess the amount of inbreeding that's occurred over time using genetic tools?
It is, yeah. So we get one copy of the DNA from our father and one copy of the DNA from our mother. And if we come from a very small population, then we get the same, we have more chance of getting the same genetic code from one parent and the other parent. And so we end up with a long stretch of identical DNA, which we call a run of homozygosity. Now, that's something that we can use, the length of that run, because if they then outbreed, if they mate with another group that's unrelated to them, then that's going to break up that stretch of identical DNA. And the length of time that's happened since the inbreeding is dictated by the length of that identical stretch of DNA where both strands are the same. So these lengths of the runs of homozygosity give us a temporal measure of when inbreeding happened. And what we're seeing in the southern residents, because this is an example that obviously I think people are very well aware of through the work of the Center for Whale Research, and then this amazing work that was done by Noah Martikados et al. We see very long stretches of runs of homozygosity that really show the sort of level of inbreeding where it could be problematic. Why is it problematic? I think this is a concept that gets lost sometime. It's not just that it actually reduces their variation so they can adapt to new, so they can't adapt to new issues with genetically, but it's also that lots of the problematic mutations are actually what we call recessive. So they're only expressed when they're in a homozygous state. Parents, getting a little bit technical here, but one of the great examples of this is chemo. So this was a big killer whale that was taken into captivity who was all white and basically had a recessive allele, a recessive disease. And it actually reduces the immunity as well as including changing the pigmentation. And this seems to be what's happening to some of the southern resident killer whales. So they have all sorts of different pressures on them. They have reduced salmon intake, and that seems to be probably the main factor that's driving their decline, and we can see real changes. But the inbreeding depression is likely to also be a problem. And what's really scary is actually working now with Shireen, who is doing her PhD. I know she's online. I saw her in the list of attendees, and she's just got some new results in the last couple of weeks. And we see actually that similar levels of inbreeding, similar levels of these deleterious mutations in these homozygous stretches are actually there in some of these North Atlantic killer whales, even though we think the population sizes are actually quite big. But they've been through these declines with the crash of the herring and so on. So there's a bit of a long answer, but yes, we do see that. It's really quite worrying what we're starting to see. And it's yet another threat that I think we wouldn't have been able to detect at the time of Cetacean Societies. It's really only now with these genomic tools that we see this threat. And I think it's something that we need to have on our radars.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you. Stephanie, question for you. Someone's asking a question about signature whistles. So is the signature whistle associated with the dolphin that produces the whistle? I think the kind of individual identity. If you can tell us a little bit more about signature whistles and how they map onto individuals.
That's exactly right. So the signature whistle's been studied for about 50 years. So there's, some really incredible groups of researchers globally that work on this topic. But what we know, and this has been well established, that each dolphin will develop its own unique identity signal, which we call its signature whistle. And it's not born with that whistle, but it will develop it within the first few months of life. And it develops a whistle that's different to the other individuals that it's associating with. So it's different to its mum, for example. It's different to its mum's associates. And that means that it's able to broadcast its own individual identity effectively. And if we think about dolphin societies, unlike killer whales that stay in family groups, bottlenose dolphins live in a very open social network. There's lots of fission fusion, so they're constantly joining and leaving groups. And here the pressure's on keeping track of each other at the individual level. So you need to develop a contact call, an identity signal that is very distinctive. And what we see with the dolphins is that the structure of the whistle, the change in frequency over time, with this whistle pattern is what encodes the identity of the animal. And that's exactly it. They produce their own signature whistle to broadcast their identity, like me saying my name to announce my presence.
It's fascinating. And so they live in this kind of dynamic network. another question was around, how many friends do they have? So, how many other dolphins, how stable are those kind of groups, those cooperative groups that they're together with?
Oh, it's so varied. So I would say if we just talk about friendships loosely and not cooperative relationships,
Yeah.
dolphins will can mix with all other individuals in their population. Small populations of dolphins might number 150. Shark Bay, we have 2,000 animals across both gulfs. So there's a lot more individuals for you to interact with and keep track of. If we think about the alliances in Shark Bay, I think they're pretty remarkable. So they only formed between males. And males will start investing in these relationships when they're very young, when they've become independent from their mom and they're juveniles. So between 4 and 12 years of age, they start investing in these relationships and playing together. They reach sexual maturity at 12 years. They start to form their alliances. The alliances crystallize, and then they stay together in these alliances their entire lives. Our oldest males are around 50 years old. So that's a significant amount of time that they spend together. It's a significant relationship. And so there's lots of mechanisms that they use to reinforce and strengthen these relationships that are ultimately important for their lifetime reproductive success because they have to work together to get access to females.
Fantastic. Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Okay, moving on to a humpback song, Ellen. Thank you, Stephanie.
Okay.
So we'll start with what might be an easy one, but I suspect it's not an easy one. How do you categorize a humpback whale population?
Ooh, so this is done more historically. So each population goes to basically a distinct breeding location. So you can slice them up nicely like that. So in the South Pacific, we've got East Coast of Australia, then New Caledonia, then Tonga, and French Polynesia. So they're really these really nice distinct on the breeding grounds and also the genetically distinct, which is the main way that the populations are told. I can tell them apart. But of course, then they migrate, for me at least, down to Antarctica, and then they space out a little bit. But there tends to be some fidelity to breeding and to feeding grounds, depending on which population we're talking about. So it's quite it's easier perhaps to do that. And then of course we have the song mixed in, which used to be distinct in some parts, but shared across the North Pacific. But you can get little differences in the song, so you can tell them apart, but it's very challenging. And then, of course, the South Pacific, where they just share them from one population to the next. But if you do a really intricate fine scale analysis, you can get differences in the song within season to be able to piece that apart vocally.
So that was actually, you touched on that. There's a question around the North Pacific humpbacks versus the South Pacific humpbacks, and if there are differences in patterns of evolution and song evolution and revolution, and maybe why those differences are there.
So I think for this, we have to go to a global scale, and it fascinates me. So these song revolutions, well, we didn't really know that they existed until my PhD supervisor, Professor Mike Node, found that the West Coast Australian song ended up in the East Coast Australian population. And then for my PhD, we found it transmitted across the South Pacific. So in the Southern Hemisphere, we have circumpolar feeding grounds. So all of the animals will come down to Antarctica to feed, and then there is nothing in the way. So there's ability to swap ocean basins from the South Indian Ocean Basin for West Australia into the South Pacific Ocean Basin for East Australia. So we have these meetings and ability to switch, whereas in the North Pacific, the populations from there's a number in Japan and then Hawaii and then around Mexico and a few more, and then these get funneled up to the north, but you can't get out of the ocean basin. So they have they don't get these, what we think is these inputs from other ocean basins, because other ocean basin songs are usually different. So you get these inputs, and for some reason they seem to like novelty. So when these new song types turn up, they just rapidly abandon their current entire display for these new displays, which is insane. And we're still trying to work out why after all these years.
Yeah, good. I've got one more question in here, Ellen. It's a little different. Is there a currently little understood culture of behavior in whales, perhaps a species you don't know in story that really fascinates you? So is there, if you could, if we write that blank check and you can go and study any aspect of whale culture you want to, what would it be?
Bowhead song, sign me up right now. It's, I mean, they have these really complex songs, and we don't know hardly anything about them, but it seems that they're culturally changing, and so I'm, you're always fascinated with the thing you don't do. So my head is in Humpback Song. It's complex, but then Bowheads, they just seem so cool and so amazing, and they live for so long, like over 200 years, some of these animals. And what does that mean for this vocal
Yeah.
display? And so I'm totally fascinated by that sort of area. But there are so many different species that as soon as we start actually looking and analyzing data, that we seem to be finding these cultural phenomena. So I think there are so many possibilities we haven't even thought of yet. I mean, because there was only one paragraph, I think, in the original book with only a couple of words in there that said culture, and now we have an entire section on it. So it is this exploding field. So there's so many options that we haven't even thought of yet.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Brilliant. Thank you. Michael, we've got a few questions, as you would guess, on killer whales. And the first one is on just reflecting on Stephanie's talk around signature whistles and vocalizations. And sort of what do we see in orca? What do we see in killer whales around individual calls?
Yeah, it's interesting. We haven't found any evidence of, signature whistles type things in killer whales at an individual level. There are individual level differences in how whales make particular calls that, they're very, very subtle, but there's been some work, training computers to tell that, to identify individuals, but it's hard and it probably varies a lot. What we do see are group specific vocalizations. So different killer whale populations will have completely different, almost completely different repertoires of calls. In the residents, those get separated out into what's called vocal clans, which are groups of whales that don't share any calls between them. All of the southern residents are a single vocal clan, that's J clan. But even within that clan, the different pods have very different repertoires. They make different calls at different rates. J pod has their S1s, which is kind of their pod specific call. K pod makes a lot of S16s and S17s. And then there is also some overlap. And beyond that, there's also evidence that within a call type, different matrilines may make specific calls in different ways, have slightly different, lengths to the different parts of them. So while we don't see, and I think this goes back to what Stephanie's point about why a signature whistle is really important if you're a bottlenose dolphin living in a big open society where you're interacting potentially with everyone else kind of at relatively similar rates, versus if you're a killer whale where you're still interacting widely, but you have your very solid lifelong, in some cases, social group. And the main information you're trying to get across in terms of identity is this group identity that is consistent throughout your entire life. So I'm sure they can tell each other apart to some degree, but the main information that's getting communicated in their calls tends to be group identity.
Yeah, good, thank you. And so we've got a few questions actually on tool use and allocalping. And so one of those questions is, how novel is allocalping behavior, and do we know where it originated in the southern residents?
So it's novel for us, certainly, to see it, but we've gone back to our footage from the very start of our drone program in 2018 when we were using cameras with much less zoom and lower quality. And we do see behavior that looks like allocalping all the way back in 2018. Whales have been interacting with kelp. We know, since the start of the study, it's not new for them to interact with kelp. Our suspicion that we're never going to be able to validate probably is that this is a very long-term behavior that's been going on for a long time that we just hadn't seen. We've seen it in all three southern resident pods. We've seen it now. I think we've now officially seen it in every member of J-pod. So we suspect it's a quite old behavior that is only really new to us because we're now able to see it. It makes it difficult, in theory, to understand how it's spread, how it's transmitted if everybody in the population does it. But we're hoping to be able to learn some more by looking at how these very young whales kind of develop the skill over their early years.
Yeah, it was wonderful to see that video of the young whale starting to try an elecarp and just starting to learn how to do it, and the adult not really kind of, so that it's that coordinated dance, and you have to kind of tango. That takes two whales to elecarp. So yeah, it's going to be fantastic to see how that kind of develops as more videos come through. There's another really great question here, Michael, on the killer whales and thinking about the differences between the ecotypes and the link between culture and those differences. So, what made the culture evolve differently between killer whales of different ecotypes that share the same environment, such as the southern residents and Biggs killer whales?
Yeah.
Could they possibly share some aspects of their culture by living in the same environment? So, I think there's two questions there: the kind of divergence, and then is there some convergence by sharing the same environment?
Yeah, really interesting question. So to start, the kind of divergence, and I think this gets back to some of the stuff Andy was talking about with the divergence in, genomes between these different populations is while they share the same physical environment, they live in very different ecologies, right? Because they're eating different things. So while the physical space they're in is the same, the way they interact with that in ecology is very different because of what they're eating. I don't think, in terms of the kind of culture of how they move, their social structure, how they behave, how they interact with one another, I think a lot of that follows on from the different the different diets that they have and the different restrictions that puts on group size and how much time you can spend socializing and how much vocal behavior you can actually do without potentially tipping off your mammal prey. Um, uh, in terms of the divergence, I'd actually leave, the original divergence, I'd leave that question up to Andy, the original divergence between Biggs and resident killer whales and what the current state of our understanding of that is.
Shall I jump into
Yeah,
that?
please do, Andy. Yeah, it's brilliant.
I'll add one more observation from contemporary whales before trying to look back at the deep past. And this is that, and it actually tells us a little bit about ourselves as well, biologists. So in the North Atlantic, we see some groups of killer whales where they will feed on herring and fish part of the year, and then they will switch. And when they switch, they break off into smaller groups, very similar size groups to Biggs killer whales. They hunt in silence. They sort of hug the coastline. In other words, they really do switch from a resident sort of behavioral pattern and social pattern to a Biggs pattern. So the ones that we were working with in Shetland, for example, our colleague Felipe Samara from the Icelandic Orca Project knew from working with them on the herring ground. So we were seeing them hunt like Biggs all the way along the coastline, hunting seals. And then she was seeing them carousel feeding in big groups off of Iceland to take these herring. So it is achievable to switch between these different cultures, even between seasons within a family group. So I think it's a really interesting contrast to have this Atlantic system, these Atlantic killer whales versus the Pacific killer whales, just to sort of understand that there is that potential for that flexibility to be there. And then in terms of what the genetics suggest, residents and Biggs are really genetically differentiated. So they are almost to the point where the Atlantic killer whales could be just as different from Biggs as the resident killer whales. It's very distinct. And what we're doing at the moment is looking along the genome. Sometimes when we see speciation, we see it in just some parts of the genome, but actually looking at the Biggs and the residents, we actually see it all the way along the genome, this complete differentiation. So, and this is with Biggs and residents going all the way around the Pacific Rim, all the way down to Japan. So this is sort of work that's in progress at the moment. We're hoping to finish it this year. But it really looks like they probably came from some very different ancestors, and they didn't sort of originate in the North Pacific and spread out. It seems like the genetic differences are of that kind of level.
Brilliant. Thank you, Andy. I'm conscious of time because we have run for an hour, but there are just a few more questions I want to get to before we leave, because I think it's important we try and answer these. And quite a few questions have come in around how can I get into, I'm at school, I'm at high school, or I'm just trying to decide on my career, my direction. I'm interested in marine mammals. What are some of the steps I can take? What sort of things should I be reading, or what some of the things I can do? Stephanie, I don't know if you've got any suggestions for aspiring marine mammal biologists who are just at the start of their careers.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I do get asked this a lot. And I think my advice would be, and I'm aware that this might come with a little bit of privilege, so I'll try and just to caveat that, if at all possible, get involved somewhere locally near you where you can volunteer, even if it's for a week over the summer or at the weekend, or if you live near this, lucky enough to live near the coast, I guess, where you can volunteer at a NGO that works on marine mammals. Um, or if you could join the Marmam mailing list, which is an international mailing list for marine mammal science. So you can look at Marmam international mailing list, you sign up for that. Opportunities are advertised. I discourage people from having to pay to take part in these opportunities. It shouldn't be like that. They should be covering your expenses if you're going to help on that project. So that's one thing that I would say. And I think even if it can't be marine mammal focused, if you know that you want to get into marine mammal behavior, maybe there's something locally that you can get involved in that would allow you to work on animal behavior to show, to add that to your CV, to show that you can get some experience in that area. And then as you get older, there might be opportunities to work further afield and to volunteer on these marine mammal projects. And I think it's that and just doing your best in school. Like I would say, I never got the top marks, but I worked really hard in school. So it's not about being the best, it's about working hard and then trying to get this extracurricular experience. And that can really strengthen your CV later down the line when you're applying for master's projects or summer internships during your undergraduate degree that are marine mammal focused or behavior focused, for example.
Yeah, it's a really, really good answer. And it just to kind of add to that, I started my academic work, my student work as a PhD student working on fish. And Michael was hanging around whales as a child. It wasn't until I was very interested in whales and dolphins, but it wasn't until my late 20s that I actually started to get involved with the Centre for Whale Research through a master's student that I was supervising. So it's that transferable skills and just being passionate about the animals, passionate about science, passionate about biology, and gaining those skills, gaining that field experience, which you can take over and carry over to a different area. So if you're not by the coast, if you're not lucky enough to be able to volunteer somewhere in a marine context, just get involved in science, get involved in ecology, get involved in where you can. Go on, Stephanie. Yeah.
And I was just going to add to that, like in my research group, I've taken on masters and PhD students and postdocs that haven't got a marine mammal background, but they have
Yeah.
a passion for animal behavior and they've
Yeah.
demonstrated that. So don't worry if you can't get access to marine mammals early on. It doesn't
Yeah.
stop you working with them as you get older, just to kind of confirm what Darren said.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay, Ellen, we haven't heard from you in a little while, so we're going to give you the last. Oh, Michael, did you have something? Oh, Andy, sorry,
No,
Andy.
And Andy
So,
was jumping in. It's okay. I'm just I'll let
okay,
Andy jump
Andy.
in.
no, it's just I wanted to add, I think, to the career path, and I guess yeah, I went to Orca Lab, which is a little bit further up the coast from the Centre for Whale Research, around the Northern Residence, and I was there for a summer, and I was 28 years old when I did that, and I think it was actually after that I actually bought the original Cetacean Societies, and then from there I was able to cobble together. I used to be able to go to the British Library after work and get access to papers that way, and I was able to cobble together my own sort of research proposal to do a master's project, and it was a little bit through not really having an understanding of the process, like the questionnaire as well. Like you don't really know the way, the sort of but you can find your own way, I think, as well. You'll find your own path if it was meant to be. For me, I was 38 by the time I got my PhD, and I think reading is everything everyone suggested is really, really good. I failed all my exams when I was 18, and I had to retake, and then I went to Polytechnic, so I was very low level, academically, and then managed to sort of find my passion. And I think if you find your passion, you go in the field, you read the literature, and you get really excited by it, then I think you will find your way. But I think reading is a really good way to sort of also have that level. When you do meet the sort of person that might take you on as a student, then you know, you really have something to talk about. So maybe the book is also a part of that pathway for you.
Thanks, Andy. And such an important question, and we've had a few of them. I just want to open it. Ellen, Michael, I want to give you guys a chance to add anything. Don't feel like you have to, but if you want to, please do, because we had a few questions on this topic.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we're demonstrating is everyone has their own path, and so for me, I was always obsessed with whales and dolphins, but it wasn't part of my undergrad. So I studied symbiosis and sea anemones, which because I did marine biology. But I was always really passionate about animal behavior, and I worked out in the process that I was really obsessed with communication. So I actually came at this through birdsong. So I actually worked on projects on birdsong, developed my skill set from birdsong, and then that was the skill set that got me straight into being able to get a PhD on whale song, because I understood I got to use some of the programs, but I understood the difference in sound types, how you categorize, and sort of got my ear in that way. And so I sort of found my passion as I went along for what it was in marine mammal science that really fascinated me. And so I went for it, but it always takes time, and you can think about those transferable skills. And I absolutely agree with Stephanie that it's those skill sets that we look for. It doesn't have to be specific marine mammal. It's those skills that you can apply across the animal kingdom.
Good. Michael, did you have anything to add?
Not really, just re-emphasizing that yeah, skills, develop your skills. You know, all the panelists here have, a huge array of skill sets. You're never going to be able to get experience in all of those things, but learning how to do, getting good at statistics is probably going to do you better than, getting a really high level scuba certification in marine mammal stuff. So a lot of these skills that you wouldn't necessarily think of as being specific to marine mammals, analyzing animal behavior, doing statistics, experimental design, like these basic scientific things are going to serve you in some cases better, in trying to get into the marine mammal world than just trying to see as many whales as you can before you apply for a master's or a PhD.
Okay, I think at that point we'll draw the session to a close. Just thank you to all the panelists for sharing your talks on the chapters, but also your experience in how you got to be where we are today. And I think that's really valuable, and I'm sure the people online have enjoyed it. To everyone who joined us, thank you for joining. There were some questions around whether or not the book was available. It's available, it's out, and the discount codes work depending on which country you're in. As long as Chicago University Press have the book online where you are, it works in the UK. The question was about the UK, it's working there. So we'll say goodbye and thank you. And we hope if you do get a chance to pick up the book, you enjoy reading it. And thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.